What are some of your biggest fears? What?
Losing my hair.
Losing your hair. And not everyone can look as good as me and Terry. So I'd be afraid too if I were you. Getting kidnapped from a gas station. I can see that, especially at night. Yeah. And depending on where you're at too. Where else? Anybody else?
Clowns.
Clowns. Stingrays.
Deep water.
Deep water.
Deep water. Really?
What? Dark? The dark. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people fear that. Anybody ever heard of ephebophobia? Is that how you spell it? Ephebophobia. Anybody ever heard of that fear? Ephebophobia. Anybody ever heard of that? You know what that fear is? That is the fear of teenagers.
Lots of people have that.
The fear of teenagers. I get that every now and then, but no matter. Can you imagine having epiphobia when you're a teenager? I mean, like, that would be nuts, wouldn't it? So, hey, did you know that studies, boys, did you know that studies show that you are only born with 2 fears? Everything else is learned. You're only born with 2 fears. Anybody know what those 2 fears are?
Claustrophobia?
Claustrophobia?
Being alone.
Being alone?
Fear itself.
Of self?
Fear itself.
Fear itself? What? Blood? Being afraid of blood? What? Dying? Okay. Huh? You're probably the closest. What? Loneliness? No.
Death attacks us.
So there's only 2 fears. Studies have shown there's 2 fears that you're born with, and that is the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else is learned over time. Yeah, everything else is learned over time. Okay, as we grow up, we develop a lot of fears. Some people are afraid of dark. Some people are afraid of spiders. I have a couple of those people in my house right now. Some people are afraid of thunderstorms, especially younger kids are afraid of thunderstorms. We all take on different fears as we grow up, right? We all have different fears, but we have to, it really depends on how we handle those fears in life. Probably I can't really say it's my fear, but one of the things I kind of fear is waking up with a snake in my bed. And the reason I fear that is not, it sounds irrational, like why would you fear that? But I've had that happen to me twice. So it kind of freaks me out a little bit to think about that. All right, so yeah.
Did you wake up and think there was a snake?
No.
Twice.
When I was a kid, I went to go get into bed. I pulled my covers off, and luckily I pulled them all the way off because there's a big old fat black snake laying in my bed.
What about the second time?
Second time, I was laying in bed sound asleep. All right, and I wake up. I felt something right there. You know how you wake up because you feel something? And I see a black line slowly disappearing off the side of my bed. And so listen, all right, I go, honey, wake up. And she's like, why? I said, I think. I said, just get up, go turn the lights on. She's like, no. She's like, what? I said, just do it. She goes, no, tell me what. I said, fine. I think there's a snake. And she just flies out of bed and turns the lights on, and there's a king snake curled up at my feet. It was about that long. It was about that big. No, they're not poisonous. You don't want them in your bed. Not in your bed. So that's why. So there's some fears that you kind of have that are kind of rational. Like that's kind of, it seems irrational, but it really is because it's happened to me twice. Then there's other fears that are like, that's never gonna happen. Like I don't know. I can't think of anything on the top of my head right now, but there's fears that like, why are you afraid of that? Like teenagers. Why be afraid of teenagers? I don't know. I mean, I can kind of get that, I guess, a little bit. But
that TV show where she was afraid that she was gonna get bit by a crocodile under the table.
yes, we were watching a TV show the other day, and her fear was that she was going to get bit by a crocodile underneath the table at a fancy restaurant. And so she was on this date, her first date with this guy, and he tried to play footsie with her, and she freaked out. It was pretty funny. So there are some fears that are like, I don't know about that. But so anyway, we all develop fears, and today we're going to talk about four fears that we want to talk about. Some common fears in life. First of all, one, the fear of loss. We've all felt we fear loss. This is a fear of losing something that is important to you. Maybe it's the fear of losing control, losing someone you love, a friend, an item. The fear of losing something. Has anybody ever suffered with that fear of loss, being afraid of losing something or someone? Yeah, I mean, most people have that fear. It may not be a crippling fear that stops you in your tracks, but it's something like, oh, I don't want that to happen type of a fear. The second fear is the fear of failure. The fear of failure. We want to do good. We want to succeed. We are, but sometimes we are afraid that what we want to do just won't work out. That's why so many people never pursue. Some people never pursue their dreams, not because they can't do something, but because they're just too afraid to fail at it. So they surrender to that fear, and they allow that fear to keep them from succeeding in life. Has anybody ever felt the fear of failure before? Anybody ever been struggled with that? Like, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. I'm afraid I'm going to mess up. Most people have that fear. They struggle with that. Fear of rejection. We want to fit in. We want to be liked. We want to be needed. Even if you say you don't, you do. Everybody subconsciously wants people to like them in some way, shape, or form. We're sometimes afraid that not everyone is going to like us. So whenever you suffer from this fear of rejection, you do two things. One of two things. You will either go out of your way to make somebody like you. You're going to be their best friend. You're going to get them. You're going to buy them things. You're going to do things for them. You're going to do anything you can to get that person like you. Or you're going to go the other route and just kind of seclude yourself. You're going to kind of go by that adage, well, if I don't put myself out there, they can't reject me. If I don't try to be their friend, they can't reject me. They kind of live, they kind of live by that. If I don't try, I can't be rejected, right? Has anybody ever suffered with the fear of rejection? Yeah. Most people, I would even dare to say everybody has been afraid of rejection at one time or another. The fear of the unknown. And I'm not talking about the unknown out in the darkness. This fear holds you back from the good things that God has for you because you're not sure what might happen. You're like, I know that there's something out there, but I just don't know what it is, so I don't know. It kind of goes along with the fear of failure, but you just don't know what's out there, so you kind of hold off on that. Has anybody ever felt a fear of unknown? Been just a fear, like, I just don't know what's out there, so I don't think I'm going to do that. A lot of people battle with these different types of fears. A lot of people struggle to the point where it paralyzes them and keeps them from doing what God has called them to do. It paralyzes them, keeps them from succeeding in life. They will sit back in a chair in the corner and then beat themselves up at home, wishing they would have stepped out and gotten involved and not let fear control them. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound judgment." Guys, we have been created, we have been put together, we have been designed for an amazing purpose. God does not bring fear. Fear is not something that God gave us. He gave you a lot of amazing qualities, a lot of amazing talents, and a big purpose, but fear was not one of them. God never intended us to live under the weight of fear. God never intended us to stand in the corner, scared to go talk to somebody, or He never intended us to be scared to succeed because we're afraid of what might happen. Some people will say fear is the opposite of faith. Have you ever heard that? Say fear is the opposite of faith. Because that if you're afraid, you don't have faith. Anybody ever heard that? But I want to challenge that way of thinking just a little bit, because in many ways, fear is a form of faith. It's just faith in the wrong things. Whenever you have fear, you're putting your faith in the what if. You're putting your faith in the unknown. You're putting your faith in the negative things, and instead of what's important, instead of what is meant to be. Most of the time, when people say "what if," it is usually followed by something bad, right? Well, what if I fall? What if she says no? What if he says no? What if I fail? What if I try and I don't make it? Normally, when we say what if, it normally follows by something negative, right? Those what ifs, when we put our faith in those what ifs, it keeps us from what God has for us. Every time there's a possibility for good or bad, we often tend to think of the bad, don't we? Whenever you're faced with something and there's opportunity for good or bad, you more than likely you're going to say, well, what if it doesn't go right, instead of what if it does go right. Normally, right? Our minds automatically goes towards the negative, and that causes us to be afraid. Everyone's guilty of this. I'm guilty of it, and we're all guilty of doing this sometimes. So, why do the what ifs matter, and what's the big deal anyway? Why does it matter that we get stuck on the what ifs and being negative? Why does it matter that we're looking at the negative, right? Why does that even matter? See, what you fear reveals about what you value. What you fear reveals what you value. For example, if you fear losing a friendship, it shows that you really value that friendship, right? If you have a friend and you don't want to lose that friend, that shows that you value them, right? It's not always a bad thing, but what you fear also reveals about what you trust God for. What you are fearing reveals about what you trust God for. Whenever you are afraid of something, you're afraid something's going to happen, it reveals that you are putting your hope in the what ifs instead of God and what He can do. Give me a minute, my paper got messed up. I need to flip it. If you have a fear that you're willing to lose a friend, then that means you're not trusting God in that friendship, and God is not head of that friendship. Is not the number one thing in that friend in that friend area. If you're not trusting God, if you're afraid of losing it, that means God is not in control. If you are afraid of making the wrong decision, then that means you're not putting God in the center of that decision. You are trusting yourself more than you're trusting God. How do you face these what ifs? How can you face this negative outlook that we tend to have in life? How can we quit looking at the negative and start trusting God more? The first thing we have to do is acknowledge our fears and choose to trust God. The number one thing, you have to acknowledge that there's a problem. You have to acknowledge that something happened. And you have to trust God in the process. It is so important to identify the fears that you have. You can walk around like, I'm not afraid of anything. You can walk around and puff out your chest. I know guys do this a lot. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of nothing. But as long as we continue to have that attitude, we're never going to fully be able to trust God and fully be able to overcome those fears. We have to acknowledge the fact that there's some things that's just plain scary. And we have to put that fear into God's hand and let Him take control of it. In Psalms 56, David is saying this as a prayer, as a song to God. He's saying, "My adversaries trample me all day, for many anguishly fight against me. When I'm afraid, I will trust in you, in God, whose word I praise. In God I trust, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" This psalm gives a very honest look at David's fears and his feelings and his things that he was dealing with at this time. David, you guys know who David is? King David fought Goliath. And this was after he fought Goliath, so he had done some crazy stuff already. But David, in the Old Testament, he was anointed the future king of Israel. Now, this didn't sit well with the king at the time, and through several different events, King Saul at the time, decided he was going to kill David because he was upset at him. Saul sent out his soldiers to hunt David down and kill him. David was fleeing for his life, hiding in caves, being hunted. David was being hunted by men who knew how to hunt and kill people. And he said this, "When I'm afraid, I will trust you. God, I will trust you." In the midst of the scariest time of David's life, he cried out and said, "God, I'm going to trust you in my fears." David puts his faith and trust in God and believes that God would see him through that fear. He knew that even though he didn't know how it was going to work out, he didn't know how he was going to get through this, he trusted God in that. So we can do the same thing. We can have that same kind of trust and same kind of faith. When we stop putting our faith in ourselves and things of this world and start putting our faith in God, first we have to admit that we are afraid and that we can't do it without God. And then we have to make the choice to trust God. And it is a everyday, every moment choice to trust God. Every day, every moment, trusting that God is going to protect us, He is going to bring us through, and He is going to be there and when we are scared and in our darkest, scariest times. After you acknowledge your fears and choose to trust God, you'll need to seek God. Seek after Him. And not just when things are hard, but every day seek after God. Seeking Him every day over and over again until He takes those fears away. That means getting in God's Word, reading it, studying it, praying, taking time and praying, and then being quiet and letting God talk to you. In Psalms 34, verse 4, it says, "I sought the Lord, and He answered me, and rescued me from all my fears." David says that God rescued him from all of his fears. When you call out to God, He will be there, and He can and will deliver you from those fears. The key is you have to be willing to let them go. It's kind of like, especially whenever you're really young, you guys are probably too old and brave now, but whenever you're real young, I remember whenever my kids were real young, they were scared. There's times like they were hanging off of a really tall thing and they're scared to death. And I'm like, I'm right here. I'm like holding on to them. I'm like, just let go and I'll pull you down. But they were so scared, they refused to let go of that ledge. But if they would have just let go of that thing that was scaring them, then their dad would have had them, and all of that fear would have been gone. Sometimes we do that in our life. We hold on to those fears. We say, God, help me. But then we hold on to those fears because we're too, sometimes those fears can be comfortable for us, or can't they? Just like that ledge, we know I'm holding on to that ledge, I'm not going anywhere. Sometimes we hold on to those fears because we're used to it. It's comfortable. We're praying God take it away from us, but at the same time, like, wait, I'm used to it. And we have to be willing to let God take those fears from us. And one thing you can do when you feel afraid, when you feel fear creeping in, close your eyes and remind yourself that God is in charge of all things. Sometimes you just got to close your eyes and jump. Just close your eyes and jump. One time, Samantha, we got a phone call from Samantha's daycare whenever she was like, I don't know, like 4. She was really young. And it's like, just so you know, she's fine, but her and her friend decided they were going to jump off the jungle gym, and she busted her lip open. And so she still has a scar, you can see it on her bottom lip. So sometimes that's what we have to do. We need to make sure God is there to catch us, unlike Samantha did. But sometimes we just gotta take the leap, jump. Just jump and say, God, catch me. I'm trusting you with all of my fears. Just catch me. And God is going to be there to catch you every single time. God knows all about us. He knows our situation, and He knows the plans that are to have for you in the future. He knows everything about you, everything that you're going to be going through, and He wants you to call on Him so He can bring you through that. God can and will bring you peace. That's why Jesus came, is to bring you peace, to bring you freedom from death, from sin, to bring you into a new glorious life. But you've got to trust Him. You've got to trust Him with everything, especially your fears. Because He's the only one that can take them away.